Have you ever witnessed a moment so brutally unfair it makes your blood boil, only to see the universe deliver a plate of ice-cold karma at 30,000 feet? A wealthy executive threw a massive tantrum in first class, demanding a young black woman in a hoodie be kicked back to economy. She called her a stowaway. She threatened the flight crew. She even bragged about her upcoming meeting with a billionaire investor to prove how important she was. But as the plane cruised high above the Atlantic, the entitled executive learned a devastating lesson. That stowaway wasn't just any passenger. She was the billionaire investor's daughter, and her revenge was absolute. The sprawling Delta One lounge at JFK International Airport was a sanctuary of hushed conversations, clinking crystal, and the scent of freshly brewed artisanal espresso. For Eleanor Langford, it was the only acceptable environment to wait for a transatlantic flight. Eleanor was a senior partner at a high-end public relations firm in Manhattan that catered to the ultra-wealthy. In her 50s, she was a woman carved from ice and ambition, draped in a perfectly tailored Chanel suit, with a posture that demanded immediate compliance from everyone around her. But beneath her polished exterior, Eleanor was terrified. Her firm was bleeding clients. The digital age had bypassed her traditional methods, and the quarterly numbers were a disaster. Her entire career, her corner office, her Upper East Side penthouse, and her carefully curated lifestyle hinged on the flight she was about to take to London Heathrow. She was scheduled to pitch Victor Lang, the notoriously ruthless CEO and founder of a massive private equity firm. Securing that European PR contract would single-handedly save her firm. Losing it would mean early forced retirement. Eleanor took a sip of her complimentary sparkling water, her eyes darting around the lounge, assessing the room's hierarchy. She recognized a few faces: a tech CEO in the corner, a prominent politician near the buffet. This was her element. This was where she belonged. Then her eyes landed on the seating area directly across from her. Sitting in a plush velvet armchair, looking completely oblivious to the exclusivity of her surroundings, was a young black woman who looked no older than 22. She was dressed in an oversized vintage gray hoodie, faded black sweatpants, and a pair of scuffed Nike Jordans. A massive pair of over-ear headphones swallowed her head, and she was slouched down furiously, typing on an iPad with a cracked screen protector. Eleanor's lips thinned into a hard line. She felt a visceral flare of annoyance. The sanctity of the premium lounge was sacred to her. It was a barrier that separated the elite from the masses. To Eleanor, this girl looked like she had wandered away from a high school field trip and somehow slipped past the front desk. Eleanor flagged down a lounge attendant, a young man named Derek Hale, snapping her manicured fingers twice. "Excuse me," Eleanor said, keeping her voice low but laced with venom. "Are you checking boarding passes at the entrance today?" "Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Is there a problem?" Derek asked, looking concerned. Eleanor discreetly nodded toward the young woman. "I find it very hard to believe that she holds a Delta One ticket. People pay top dollar to sit in this lounge. We expect a certain standard of clientele. It's highly inappropriate that someone who looks like a loiterer is taking up space here. Perhaps you should double-check her credentials." Derek glanced over, his expression remaining perfectly neutral. "Ma'am, I assure you, everyone in this lounge has been thoroughly vetted and holds a valid boarding pass for our premium cabins." "Are you sure?" Eleanor pressed, her eyes narrowing. "Sometimes people sneak in when the desk is busy. I would hate to have to write an email to corporate about a lapse in security." "I'm entirely certain, ma'am. Can I get you another sparkling water?" Derek offered, clearly eager to disengage. Eleanor scoffed and waved him away. "No, just make sure my flight isn't delayed." Across the room, the young woman, whose name was Lila Lang, remained completely absorbed in her iPad. She hadn't noticed Eleanor's glare, nor would she have cared if she had. Lila was exhausted. She had spent recent days in New York doing boots-on-the-ground research for a new tech startup her father's firm was considering acquiring. She preferred to dress comfortably when she traveled, and she never flaunted her family's immense wealth. Her father, Victor Lang, had raised her to value hard work over designer labels. She was flying back to London to present her findings to the board the next day. Eleanor spent the following time stewing. Every time Lila reached for a complimentary pastry or adjusted her oversized hoodie, Eleanor felt a personal affront. It wasn't just the clothes. It was the absolute comfort Lila exuded. She wasn't acting intimidated. She wasn't looking around in awe. She belonged there. And that reality grated against every prejudiced, elitist bone in Eleanor's body. When the boarding announcement for the flight to London Heathrow finally echoed through the lounge, Eleanor practically leaped out of her seat. She grabbed her leather carry-on, eager to leave the irritation behind and settle into her first-class suite. She was ready for champagne, a hot towel, and hours of uninterrupted luxury. She had no idea the nightmare was just beginning. The priority boarding lane at the gate was a bottleneck of impatient executives and wealthy vacationers. Eleanor bypassed the general boarding queue with practiced arrogance, flashing her boarding pass at the gate agent. She marched down the jet bridge, the rhythmic click-clack of her designer heels echoing against the corrugated metal walls. "Welcome aboard, Miss Langford," the lead flight attendant, Lena Hart, greeted her warmly at the door of the aircraft. "You're in Suite 2A today, right this way." Eleanor offered a tight, condescending smile. "Thank you. I'd like a glass of Laurent Perrier before takeoff, please. And I absolutely do not want to be disturbed during the dinner service." "Of course, ma'am. Let me take your coat." Eleanor settled into her suite, running her hand approvingly over the pristine leather of the lie-flat seat. She organized her documents, placing the glossy pitch deck on the side console. This was her kingdom. The sliding privacy door, the massive entertainment screen, the noise-canceling headphones. It was exactly the sanctuary she needed to mentally prepare for the most important meeting of her life. She had just taken her first sip of pre-departure champagne when a shadow fell across her suite. Eleanor looked up, her blood instantly boiling. Walking down the aisle, dragging a battered duffel bag that looked like it had seen better days, was the same young black woman from the lounge. Lila. Eleanor watched in disbelief as Lila stopped right in front of her row. No, Eleanor thought. Absolutely not. She's probably just cutting through to get to Premium Select. But Lila didn't keep walking. She tossed her duffel bag into the overhead bin above seat 1A, the suite directly in front of Eleanor's. Lila plopped down into the seat, kicking off her Jordans and pulling her knees to her chest, entirely unbothered by the luxurious environment. She popped a piece of gum into her mouth and pulled out her cracked iPad. Eleanor was paralyzed with indignation. Seat 1A was the most coveted seat on the aircraft. It was usually reserved for VIPs, million-milers, or celebrities. For this child in sweatpants to be sitting there was an insult to the entire pricing structure of the airline. Eleanor's internal narrative spun wildly out of control. She must be an employee's daughter, flying non-revenue, or maybe a lottery winner who doesn't know how to act in public. Or more likely, she's in the wrong seat entirely. Eleanor slammed her champagne flute onto the console, the liquid spilling over the rim. She pressed the call button furiously. A moment later, Lena appeared. "Lena, is everything all right, Ms. Langford?" "No, it is not," Eleanor hissed, leaning forward so her voice wouldn't carry, though her tone was razor-sharp. "There is a mistake with the seating arrangement." Lena looked confused. "Is there something wrong with your suite?" "Not my suite. Hers." Eleanor pointed an accusatory manicured finger at the back of Lila's seat. "The girl in 1A. She does not belong here. I saw her in the lounge acting suspiciously. I am 99% sure she's supposed to be in the main cabin and just sat down here hoping no one would notice. Lena's professional smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning, a little tighter this time. Ma'am, I scanned everyone's boarding pass at the door. I can assure you that every passenger in this cabin is in their correct seat. Well, you must have missed something, Eleanor insisted, her voice rising slightly. Look at her. Does she look like she paid top dollar for a transatlantic suite? She's wearing sweatpants, for God's sake. I want you to go over there right now and ask to see her boarding pass. I won't feel secure on this flight with a stowaway sitting mere feet from my belongings. Lena straightened up, her tone cooling significantly. Ms. Langford, Delta does not enforce a dress code in our premium cabins. The passenger in 1A is exactly where she is supposed to be. I will not harass another guest based on her attire. Harass? Eleanor gasped, her face flushing red. I am a Diamond Medallion member. I fly this route multiple times a year. I am simply asking you to do your job and verify her ticket. At that exact moment, Lila, who had heard the rising commotion, turned around. She pushed one side of her headphones back, resting it behind her ear. Her dark eyes met Eleanor's frantic, angry glare. Is there a problem? Lila asked. Her voice was calm and melodic, with a crisp, educated British accent that caught Eleanor slightly off guard. Yes, there is, Eleanor snapped, abandoning all pretense of subtlety. I was just asking the flight attendant to verify that you are actually supposed to be sitting in first class. People often get confused during boarding. Lila blinked, looking from Eleanor to the deeply uncomfortable flight attendant. A faint, almost pitying smile touched her lips. I'm not confused, she said simply. We'll see about that, Eleanor muttered. Ms. Langford, Lena interrupted, her voice firm and authoritative. The passenger in 1A is confirmed. This conversation is over. If you cannot lower your voice and treat the other passengers with respect, we will have a different conversation before we push back from the gate. Do I make myself clear? Eleanor was stunned into silence. She had never been spoken to like that by service staff. She felt the eyes of the other passengers in the cabin turning toward her. Humiliated and furious, Eleanor sank back into her seat, violently pulling the privacy door of her suite halfway shut. Fine, she thought, her heart hammering with toxic adrenaline. Let the airline cater to riffraff. I don't have time for this. I have a billionaire to impress. She snatched up the pitch deck, glaring at the logo on the front page. She would remember this indignity. She would definitely be writing a scathing letter to the CEO of Delta once she landed. But for now, she had to focus on Victor Lang. In seat 1, Lila quietly slipped her headphone back over her ear. She pulled up the firm's server on her iPad, opening the file labeled with Eleanor's firm name, and added a small digital sticky note. The plane's engines began to whine as they prepared for pushback. The real turbulence hadn't even begun. As the flight progressed, the aircraft was cruising smoothly at 35,000 feet over the dark expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. The cabin lights had been dimmed to a soft, ambient blue, and the gentle hum of the engines usually acted as a lullaby for the wealthy passengers in the premium cabin. But Eleanor Langford was wide awake, and she was seething. Her initial embarrassment during boarding had fermented into a toxic, obsessive rage. She couldn't focus on her pitch deck. She couldn't enjoy the pan-seared sea bass the chef had prepared. Every single thing Lila did in the seat ahead of her felt like a deliberate personal attack. When Lila reclined her seat, Eleanor dramatically sighed, acting as if her personal space had been violently invaded, even though the suites were entirely separate. When Lila ordered a ginger ale and a side of potato chips, instead of partaking in the multi-course tasting menu, Eleanor scoffed audibly, muttering about uncivilized palates. But the breaking point occurred just after the dinner service concluded. Lila had been working diligently on her iPad, reviewing financial projections. The Wi-Fi on the flight was notoriously spotty, and she needed to send an encrypted file before they lost connection completely. To get a better signal, Lila stood up in her suite, stretching her legs, holding the iPad up slightly to catch the router's bandwidth. In doing so, her elbow lightly brushed the top of the divider separating her suite from Eleanor's. It was a feather-like touch, barely a whisper of contact, but for Eleanor, it was the declaration of war she had been waiting for. Eleanor slammed her laptop shut with a loud crack that echoed through the quiet cabin. She stood up abruptly, leaning over the divider, her face contorted with fury. "Excuse me," Eleanor hissed, her voice vibrating with malice. "Do you mind keeping your limbs to yourself? You have been a disruption since the moment you stepped onto this aircraft." Lila, startled, lowered her iPad. "I barely touched the divider. I'm just trying to get a signal." "I don't care what you're trying to do," Eleanor snapped, her voice rising out of a whisper and into a shrill, commanding tone. "You have no respect for personal space, no respect for the decorum of this cabin, and frankly, I am sick of looking at you. Put your little toy away and sit down." Lila's expression hardened. The polite, amused tolerance she had shown earlier vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp intelligence. "I suggest you lower your voice," Lila said evenly. "You are making a scene over nothing." "Do not tell me what to do, you arrogant little brat," Eleanor shouted, completely abandoning her composure. Several passengers in the surrounding suites popped their heads up, disturbed by the sudden noise. The commotion instantly summoned Lena and the lead purser, a stern-looking man named Elliot Graves. They rushed down the aisle, their faces tight with concern. "Ladies, please, what is going on here?" Elliot asked, stepping between the two suites. "We need to keep the noise down. Passengers are trying to sleep." Eleanor turned her wrath onto the purser. "What is going on is that this child is entirely out of control. She is practically jumping around in her seat, bumping into my suite, and harassing me. I demanded she to be moved before takeoff, and my concerns were ignored. I want her relocated immediately. Send her back to economy where she belongs." Elliot looked at Lila, who was standing quietly, her arms crossed defensively over her oversized hoodie. "Miss, is this true?" "It's completely fabricated," Lila replied quietly. I stood up to stretch and accidentally grazed the plastic divider. She's been making aggressive comments toward me since we were in the lounge at JFK. "Liar," Eleanor shrieked. "I am a respectable businesswoman. I am a senior partner at my firm. Do you have any idea the amount of stress I am under? Do you have any idea who I am flying to meet?" Elliot held up a hand, his face stern. "Ma'am, I do not care who you are flying to meet. I need you to sit down and lower your voice, or this will become a security issue." "A security issue?" Eleanor laughed, a harsh, hysterical sound. She reached into her suite, grabbed the pitch deck, and practically shoved it into Elliot's chest. "You want to talk about security? You want to talk about power? Tomorrow morning, I'm sitting down with Victor Lang, the CEO of a massive private equity firm. He manages billions in assets. He is a personal friend of the executives who run this airline. If I tell him that I was treated like garbage on a Delta flight, your careers will be over before we even land in London." The cabin went dead silent. The only sound was the drone of the jet engines. Eleanor stood tall, chest heaving, a triumphant, malicious smirk on her face. She had played her ultimate trump card. She had dropped the name of a titan. She expected the flight crew to instantly cower, to apologize, and to drag the girl in sweatpants to the back of the plane. Instead, the flight crew remained frozen. Eleanor looked over at Lila, expecting to see fear in the young woman's eyes. But Lila wasn't scared. Lila wasn't intimidated. Lila was looking down at the pitch deck in Eleanor's hand, reading the words on the cover. Slowly, Lila raised her head. The corners of her mouth twitched upward, forming a slow, chilling sour smile. She looked Eleanor dead in the eye, the British accent cutting through the tense air like a scalpel. "You're meeting with Victor Lang tomorrow?" Lila asked softly. "Yes, I am," Eleanor spat, reveling in what she thought was the girl's sudden realization of her insignificance. "So I suggest you pack up your little bag and walk yourself to the back of the plane before I make things very, very ugly for you." Lila let out a soft, genuine laugh. It was a sound completely devoid of fear. She reached into the pocket of her faded sweatpants and pulled out her phone. "Well, Eleanor," Lila said, her voice echoing perfectly in the quiet cabin, "I wouldn't worry too much about preparing for that meeting, because I can assure you it's not going to happen." Eleanor frowned, her triumphant smirk faltering slightly. "What are you talking about?" Lila leaned forward, resting her hands on the divider Eleanor guarded so fiercely. "My name is Lila Lang. Victor Lang is my father." The silence that followed Lila's declaration was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that usually precedes a car crash. For several seconds, the only sound in the premium cabin was the steady, rhythmic whoosh of the aircraft cutting through the frigid air over the Atlantic. Eleanor Langford stood frozen, her hands gripping the plastic divider of the first-class suite so tightly her knuckles had turned completely white. Her brain, usually a steel trap of PR spin and rapid-fire comebacks, short-circuited. Lang. It was a common enough name. Millions of people were named Lang. This girl in the faded sweatpants and scuffed Jordans was lying. She had to be lying. She had seen the logo on the pitch deck, read the name of the CEO, and decided to play a cruel theatrical prank to humiliate Eleanor in front of the flight crew. "You're lying," Eleanor breathed, though her voice lacked its previous venom. It came out sounding thin, brittle, and desperate. "You saw the cover of my dossier. You're playing a very stupid, very dangerous game, young lady." Lila didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply picked up her iPad, tapped the screen a few times, and held it up for Eleanor to see. The screen was open to the firm's internal secure portal, a proprietary software interface that Eleanor had only ever seen mocked up in highly confidential briefing documents. In the top right corner, a professional headshot of Lila was displayed next to her name and title. Lila Lang, Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions. But Lila didn't stop there. She tapped the screen again, opening her email client. The most recent email in her inbox, time-stamped less than 3 hours ago, was from Victor Lang, CEO. The subject line read, Kensington PR pitch, Heathrow arrival. The body of the email was brief. "Darling, James will be waiting at Terminal 3 with the car. Let me know what you think of the Langford woman's numbers once you review them on the flight. Love, Dad." All the blood drained from Eleanor's face. The color vanished so rapidly, she looked as though she were about to faint. Her perfectly applied lipstick suddenly looked stark and clownish against her pale skin. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I don't need to play games, Eleanor," Lila said, lowering the iPad. The faint British accent carried an undeniable weight of authority now. "My father sent me to New York to evaluate 2 boutique tech startups for acquisition. But my secondary task was to review your firm's financials before he wasted his morning on your pitch. I prefer to travel comfortably. I didn't realize my choice of hoodie would result in a masterclass on your firm's corporate culture." Eleanor's legs gave out. She collapsed backward onto her plush leather lie-flat seat, her breathing shallow and erratic. The magnificent, impenetrable armor of her ego had been pierced and shattered in a matter of seconds. Elliot, the lead purser, had seen enough. The professional neutrality he had maintained vanished, replaced by the stern authority of a man in charge of an aircraft. "Ms. Langford," Elliot said, his voice dropping an octave, "you have disrupted this cabin." harassed another passenger, and threatened my crew. You will remain in your suite for the duration of this flight. You will not speak to Ms. Lang again. You will not look at Ms. Lang again. If you step 1 foot out of line, I will have the Metropolitan Police waiting for you at the jet bridge at London Heathrow. Do you understand me? Eleanor could only manage a weak, jerky nod, her eyes fixed on the gray carpet of the airplane floor. Good, Elliot snapped. He turned to Lila, his expression softening instantly into deep apologetic respect. Ms. Lang, I am so incredibly sorry for this experience. Can I move you to another suite? 4A is empty, and it might provide you with more peace. Thank you, Elliot. But no, Lila replied, offering him a warm smile. I'm perfectly fine right here in 1A. Could I just get another ginger ale when you have a moment? Right away, ma'am. The crew dispersed, pulling the heavy curtain that separated the galley from the cabin shut. The surrounding passengers, having witnessed the spectacular public execution of Eleanor's career, slowly retreated into their own suites, pulling their privacy doors closed. For Eleanor, the remaining hours were an agonizing, claustrophobic nightmare. She stared at the digital flight map on her entertainment screen, watching the little airplane icon inch its way across the ocean. Every mile was a physical weight on her chest. She poured herself a massive glass of red wine with shaking hands, spilling drops of it onto her pristine white blouse. She didn't even care. Her mind was spinning wildly, running through permutations of how she could possibly fix this. Her firm was already on life support. Cordelia Vance, the firm's ruthless founding partner, had made it abundantly clear. Secure the account, or clean out your desk. Eleanor pulled out her laptop, her fingers trembling as she hovered over the keyboard. She opened a blank document and tried to draft an apology. Dear Ms. Lang, I cannot express the depth of my regret. Delete. Lila, please understand, I was under immense pressure. Delete. Ms. Lang, if you could just find it in your heart to overlook a moment of weakness. Delete. Nothing worked. Every word felt hollow, pathetic, and hopelessly inadequate. She peered through the tiny gap in her privacy door, looking at the suite ahead. Lila had reclined her seat, pulled a soft blanket over her, and appeared to be sleeping soundly. Eleanor wanted to scream. How could the girl just sleep? Didn't she realize she held a woman's entire livelihood in her hands? But as Eleanor stared at the back of seat 1A, the brutal reality settled over her. Lila Lang didn't care. To a billionaire's daughter who helped run a multi-billion-dollar empire, Eleanor Langford wasn't a formidable executive. She was just an obnoxious nuisance on an airplane, a gnat that had buzzed too loudly and was about to be swatted. As the plane began its initial descent into the gray, cloud-choked sky over London, Eleanor felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She scrambled to the first-class lavatory, splashing cold water on her face, staring at her reflection in the harsh fluorescent lighting. She looked years older than she had at JFK. Her eyes were bloodshot, her meticulously styled hair flat and lifeless. She took a deep breath. You are Eleanor Langford, she told her reflection. You have spun PR disasters for politicians caught in scandals and CEOs facing federal indictments. You can spin this. You just have to get her alone. Apologize. Grovel if you have to. Just don't let her cancel the meeting. She practically ran back to her seat as the fastened seatbelt sign illuminated with a sharp chime. She gripped the armrests as the massive aircraft broke through the thick London fog. The sprawling concrete expanse of Heathrow Airport rose up to meet them. The plane touched down with a heavy thud, the thrust reversers roaring as they slowed down on the runway. For Eleanor, it sounded like a death knell. The taxi to the terminal felt like it took hours. The moment the seatbelt sign turned off, Eleanor unbuckled in a flash. She grabbed her carry-on and her trench coat, stepping out into the aisle. She positioned herself right behind Lila's suite, determined to catch her before she could disappear into the sprawling labyrinth of the airport. Lila took her time. She stretched unhurriedly, slipped her scuffed Jordans back onto her feet, and slung her battered duffel bag over her shoulder. She didn't even glance at Eleanor as she stepped into the aisle and began walking toward the exit door where Lena and Elliot were waiting to bid the passengers farewell. "Ms. Lang, please wait," Eleanor blurted out, her voice tight, scrambling to keep up. Lila stopped just short of the aircraft door. She turned around slowly, her expression unreadable. "Ms. Lang," Eleanor started, her hands clasped together in a pleading gesture, completely abandoning her usual haughty demeanor. "I need to apologize profoundly. My behavior was inexcusable. I was stressed. I was exhausted. And I took it out on you. It was a massive lapse in judgment. I am begging you, please do not let a personal misunderstanding affect the business between the firm and Axiom. Let me buy you a coffee at the Savoy." "Let me explain." Lila looked at her. It wasn't a look of anger. It was worse. It was a look of clinical, detached pity. "A personal misunderstanding, Eleanor?" Lila asked, her voice calm and quiet enough that only Eleanor and the flight crew could hear. "You tried to use your perceived social status to bully someone you thought was beneath you. You demanded I be thrown out of a cabin I paid for because my clothes offended your sensibilities. You didn't have a lapse in judgment. You showed me exactly who you are." Eleanor swallowed hard, tears of sheer panic pricking the corners of her eyes. "People make mistakes. I am deeply sorry." "I accept your apology," Lila said simply. Eleanor felt a microscopic sliver of hope ignite in her chest. "You do? Then the pitch meeting at 10. I can still come to Mayfair." Lila tilted her head slightly, adjusting the strap of her duffel bag. "Oh, Eleanor, you still don't understand, do you? You think my father is the one who makes the final call on PR acquisitions? He doesn't. He delegates that entirely to me. I am the one you were flying here to pitch. My father was just going to sit in the room to make you feel important." The sliver of hope was instantly crushed, ground into dust beneath the heel of Lila's worn-out sneakers. "We are a private equity firm managing billions in pension funds and international assets," Lila continued, her voice turning cold and strictly professional. "Our public relations firm needs to possess tact, emotional intelligence, and grace under fire. You possess none of those things. If you treat a stranger in sweatpants like garbage, I can only imagine how you treat junior staff or the press when things don't go your way. Your firm is a liability, and we do not invest in liabilities." Eleanor opened her mouth, but her throat had seized up. She couldn't breathe. "Have a safe trip back to New York, Eleanor," Lila said. She turned to the flight crew, her warm smile returning instantly. "Thank you for a wonderful flight, Elliot, Lena. I'll make sure to send a commendation to your hub manager." "Thank you, Ms. Lang. Have a lovely day in London," Elliot replied, shooting a withering glare at Eleanor. Lila stepped off the plane. Eleanor stumbled after her a few seconds later, stepping onto the jet bridge. She watched helplessly as Lila bypassed the standard customs line entirely. Waiting at the end of the corridor was a man in a sharp black suit, holding a discreet placard with the firm logo. He greeted Lila respectfully, took her battered duffel bag, and ushered her through a private side door marked for VIPs. Eleanor, a senior partner at a top firm, a diamond medallion flyer, a woman who demanded luxury, was left standing alone in the cold, drafty corridor, with the rest of the general boarding passengers pushing past her. She mechanically walked through the winding halls of the terminal, her mind completely blank. She cleared customs in a daze, collected her luggage, and stepped out into the dreary, drizzling London morning. She bypassed the luxury black cabs and found herself standing by a concrete pillar, waiting for an Uber. As she stood in the damp cold, her phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out. The caller ID flashed Cordelia Vance, managing partner. Eleanor stared at the screen, her stomach violently churning. She pressed accept. bringing the phone to her ear with a trembling hand. "Hello?" Eleanor repped. "Eleanor, what the hell did you do?" Cordelia's voice didn't just bark. It sounded like shattering glass. She was furious, a terrifying octave higher than her usual commanding tone. "Cordelia, Shut up and listen to me," Cordelia snapped, cutting her off. "I just got off the phone with Victor Lang's executive assistant not 10 minutes ago. The assistant informed me that the firm is permanently pulling out of all contract negotiations with us. He said that a cultural mismatch was identified by their VP of Acquisitions during a direct interaction with our lead partner. What does that mean, Eleanor? Have you even landed yet?" "Cordelia, there was an incident on the plane," Eleanor stammered, the words tumbling out of her mouth in a pathetic rush. "A misunderstanding with his daughter. I didn't know who she was. She was dressed like a vagrant. I thought she was a stowaway. I can fix this. I'm going to go to their office in Mayfair right now. I'll demand to see Victor. I'll explain everything." There was a long, terrifying silence on the other end of the line. When Cordelia finally spoke, her voice was deathly quiet. "You called Victor Lang's daughter a vagrant. You insulted the heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire." Cordelia let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "You're not going to Mayfair, Eleanor. You're going back to the airport. Book the next flight back to JFK. Cordelia, please, give me a chance to smooth this over." "There is no smoothing this over," Cordelia roared, finally losing her temper entirely. "You just lost the account that was keeping this firm afloat. By tomorrow morning, the entire industry is going to know that we were dumped. You don't have a job anymore, Eleanor. Don't bother coming to the office when you get back. HR will courier your belongings to your apartment." Click. The line went dead. Eleanor stood on the curbside at Heathrow, the relentless London drizzle soaking into the shoulders of her expensive trench coat. The sleek, dark-tinted Mercedes-Benz carrying Lila Lang glided past her in the designated VIP lane, disappearing into the morning traffic. Eleanor Langford, the queen of high society spin, was entirely, spectacularly alone. And she had done it all to herself. The cold, unforgiving London rain soaked right through Eleanor's Burberry trench coat, but she barely felt it. Standing on the curbside at Heathrow, she stared at her phone screen. The call with Cordelia was already a painful echo in her mind. HR will courier your belongings to your apartment. No. Eleanor Langford did not go down without a fight. She had spent decades clawing her way to the top of the Manhattan PR food chain. She had buried scandals for senators and resurrected the careers of disgraced hedge fund managers. She was not going to let a single misunderstanding with an overly sensitive young woman destroy her life. Cordelia was acting rashly. If Eleanor could just get into the room with Victor Lang, she could fix this. Victor was old money, a ruthless businessman from her generation. He would understand that feelings had no place in billion-dollar transactions. Eleanor hailed a passing black cab, throwing her designer luggage into the back. "Axiom Global Ventures, Berkeley Square, Mayfair, and step on it." During the ride into central London, Eleanor reapplied her makeup, smoothed her damp hair, and practiced her pitch. She would be contrite, but firm. She would appeal to Victor's bottom line. The cab pulled up to a towering, immaculate glass and limestone building that dominated the corner of Berkeley Square. Eleanor paid the driver, took a deep breath, and marched through the revolving doors into the sprawling marble-floored lobby. The environment was intimidatingly quiet. A massive abstract sculpture sat in the center of the room, flanked by 2 reception desks manned by staff who looked like runway models. Eleanor approached the nearest desk, straightening her posture to project absolute authority. "Good morning. Eleanor Langford to see Victor Lang," she said to the receptionist, a sharp-featured woman whose silver name tag read Isabella. Isabella typed briskly into her computer, her expression completely neutral. "Do you have an appointment, Ms. Langford?" I had a 10 o'clock meeting scheduled for today regarding the PR acquisition. There was a slight mix-up with my flight, but Mr. Lang is expecting me. Isabella frowned slightly, checking her screen again. I apologize, Ms. Langford, but my system shows that all meetings with your firm have been officially canceled by the Vice President of Acquisitions. Furthermore, Mr. Lang's schedule is entirely locked for the day. Listen to me, Isabella, Eleanor said, leaning over the high desk, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, urgent whisper. This is a multi-million-dollar miscommunication. If you do not let me up to the executive floor right now, your boss is going to lose out on a massive opportunity, and you will be the one held responsible. Call his office. Tell him Eleanor Langford is downstairs. Before Isabella could reach for her phone, the soft chime of the private VIP elevator echoed through the lobby. The polished steel doors slid open. Eleanor froze. Walking out of the elevator were two people in deep conversation. One was Lila. She had changed out of her sweatpants and into a stunning, impeccably tailored navy blue pantsuit that screamed quiet luxury. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek bun, and she carried a leather portfolio. Beside her was an older man with striking silver hair, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit. He radiated power and effortless command. Eleanor recognized him instantly from her research dossier. Victor Lang. Eleanor's pulse hammered in her throat. This was it, her only chance. She pushed past the reception desk and stepped directly into their path. "Mr. Lang!" Eleanor called out, her voice echoing too loudly in the cavernous lobby. The two executives stopped. The security guards flanking the entrance immediately tensed, their hands going to their radios, but Victor held up a single hand, signaling them to hold. Victor looked at Eleanor, her brow furrowed in mild confusion. He glanced at Lila, who had completely stopped smiling. "And you are?" Victor asked, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone. "Mr. Lang, my name is Eleanor Langford. I am the senior partner at my firm. I flew in from New York this morning to present our pitch for your European PR contract." Eleanor spoke rapidly, desperation leaking into her polished tone. "I understand there has been a highly unfortunate miscommunication regarding my firm's viability, and I came here directly from the airport to speak with you personally to clear it up." Victor's expression shifted from confusion to a cold, stony recognition. He didn't look angry. He looked utterly unimpressed. "There was no miscommunication, Ms. Langford," Victor said quietly. "My daughter briefed me on the situation during her ride from Heathrow. I understand you were incredibly disrespectful to her, threatened her, and attempted to have her removed from her flight simply because you felt entitled to do so." "Mr. Lang, please. It was a momentary lapse," Eleanor pleaded, taking a step forward. "I am a professional. I have decades of experience. We are the best firm in New York. You cannot let a silly emotional misunderstanding dictate a business decision of this magnitude. I appeal to your business sense. Let me show you our numbers." She reached into her bag to pull out the pitch deck, but Victor's next words stopped her dead. "You think this is about emotion?" Victor asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Ms. Langford, you fundamentally misunderstand how we operate. We do not evaluate businesses based purely on spreadsheets. We evaluate the character of the people running them." Victor placed a hand on Lila's shoulder, looking at Eleanor with absolute disdain. "You see a silly misunderstanding," Victor continued. "I see a catastrophic lack of judgment. I see an executive who is so blinded by her own arrogance that she cannot accurately assess the environment around her. If you treat people poorly when you think they have no power, you are a liability. I would never entrust my company's public image to someone with such a glaring deficit of character." Eleanor opened her mouth, but Victor cut her off, his tone entirely final. "Furthermore, Ms. Langford, you seem to operate under the delusion that you can bypass my daughter and appeal to me. Let me be perfectly clear. Lila is the Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions. She makes the final call on these contracts. I trust her judgment implicitly. If she says your firm is out, your firm is out." Lila stepped forward, her dark eyes locking onto Eleanor's pale face. "I told you on the tarmac, Eleanor," Lila said calmly. "We do not invest in liabilities. It's time for you to leave." Eleanor looked from Lila's unwavering gaze to Victor's icy glare. The reality finally crashed over her, suffocating and complete. There was no spin for this. There was no PR magic that could undo the damage. She had gambled her entire career on her own prejudice, and she had lost everything. Two large security guards in black suits materialized behind Eleanor. "Ma'am, we need to ask you to exit the premises," one of them said, his voice firm but polite. Eleanor Langford, a woman who had once commanded boardrooms with a single look, didn't fight back. She clutched her expensive leather bag to her chest, lowered her head, and allowed herself to be escorted out of the building back into the freezing London rain. In the months that followed, the bustling main terminal of John F. Kennedy International Airport was a chaotic symphony of rolling suitcases, shouting passengers, and blaring overhead announcements. Eleanor stood in line at a generic coffee kiosk near a gate. She was unrecognizable from the woman who had terrorized the Delta One lounge months prior. Gone was the pristine Chanel suit. Gone were the towering designer heels. Today, Eleanor wore a simple pair of dark jeans, sensible walking shoes, and an oversized beige sweater. The haughty, ice-cold posture had been replaced by a weary slump. The fallout from the disaster had been swift and brutal. Cordelia Vance had not been bluffing. Eleanor was officially terminated for gross misconduct that endangered a critical client relationship. Because the public relations industry was inherently built on whispers and reputation, the story of her disastrous flight spread like wildfire. No top-tier firm would touch her. Finances, without her massive partnership draw, meant she couldn't sustain her lifestyle. Her Upper East Side penthouse was currently on the market. She had sold her country home just to cover her mounting legal and financial obligations. Current status: she was flying to Chicago today to interview for a mid-level communications manager position at a regional logistics company. It was a staggering downgrade, but she desperately needed the income. Eleanor paid for her black coffee and walked over to the seating area at her gate. She was flying economy on a budget airline. There was no VIP lounge. There was no pre-departure champagne. There was only a cramped plastic seat next to a garbage can. She sat down, placing her canvas tote bag on the floor, and pulled out her smartphone. She opened an industry news app, scrolling idly through the headlines. Suddenly, a featured article caught her eye. Forbes Finance. Axiom Global Ventures announces massive European tech acquisition. Eleanor's thumb hovered over the screen. Against her better judgment, she clicked the link. The article detailed how the firm had successfully acquired 3 massive European tech startups, a move that analysts predicted would increase the firm's portfolio value significantly. But it was the accompanying photograph that made Eleanor's stomach twist into a heavy knot. It was a picture of Lila Lang. She was standing at a podium at a press conference in London, smiling confidently, looking sharp and brilliant. The caption read, "Lila Lang, VP of Strategic Acquisitions, spearheaded the multi-billion-dollar deal, proving that the next generation of leadership is already a force to be reckoned with." Eleanor stared at the picture of the young woman she had once called a stowaway. She had underestimated Lila so completely, blinded by her own superficial metrics of success. "Excuse me," a loud, shrill voice suddenly barked, pulling Eleanor out of her thoughts. Eleanor looked up. A woman in a flashy designer coat was standing a few feet away, berating a young gate agent. "What do you mean the flight is overbooked?" the woman shrieked, waving her boarding pass aggressively in the agent's face. "I am a platinum member. I paid for extra legroom. You need to bump someone else off this flight. Look at these people. Half of them look like they've never flown before in their lives. Bump one of them." The woman vaguely gestured toward the seating area, her eyes briefly locking onto Eleanor in her plain beige sweater and jeans. The woman's lip curled in obvious disgust before she turned her wrath back onto the exhausted gate agent. A heavy, profound silence settled over Eleanor's mind. She was looking into a mirror. She was seeing the exact same entitlement, the exact same toxic arrogance that had defined her entire life. For decades, Eleanor had been that woman, demanding the world bow to her, treating service workers like dirt, and judging everyone's worth by the brand of their luggage or the cut of their clothes. She watched the woman continue to yell, watched the discomfort of the surrounding passengers, and felt a deep, burning flush of shame creep up her neck. Eleanor quietly locked her phone, slipping it into her pocket. She didn't scoff at the woman. She didn't roll her eyes. She just picked up her tepid black coffee and took a slow sip. When the boarding announcement finally came, calling for the final zone, Eleanor slung her canvas tote over her shoulder. She patiently waited her turn in the chaotic line, shuffling down the jet bridge, and found her seat in row 34, a cramped middle seat near the back of the plane. As she squeezed into her seat, apologizing softly to the passenger next to her, Eleanor Langford finally understood the lesson she had learned at 35,000 feet. Respect wasn't something you demanded because of the clothes you wore or the title on your business card. It was something you earned by how you treated the people around you. And the universe, she realized, had a highly effective way of collecting its debts. What a satisfying dose of instant karma. Eleanor thought she owned the world, only to realize that true power doesn't need to shout. It just lets you dig your own grave. This story is the ultimate reminder that you should never judge a book by its cover, or in this case, a billionaire by her hoodie. If you loved watching this entitled executive get exactly what she deserved at 35,000 feet, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a good revenge story. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life drama.